people, we have plenty of power.
My guest this morning is a man who is usually called by the news media a civic activist, a man who champions various causes that he believes will make Kansas City a better place to live.
We ought not to live by what someone else thinks we ought to do. If we are aware of an injustice, we have the power to act.
And I swore to myself that I'd grow up and get out of there as fast as I could.
And if we turn away because of that syndrome, what can one person do? Then we will no doubt feel frustrated and wretched.
But right now, let's take a look, just a moment, at the man they call the activist lawyer and the remarkable and patient woman behind him.
My guest this morning is Sid Willens. Sid, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I described you as a civic activist and champion of causes. I guess that is rather accurate, isn't it?
Well, I hope that that's the worst you call me.
He's just gung-ho, ready to go, and has more energy than most people half his age.
My name is Sidney L. Willens. I'm 86 years old. Might as well admit it.
He certainly goes down, in my mind, as one of the leaders in Kansas City over a period of years. That's unusual because he's not a government official, he's not a mayor, he's not a city council person. He is an individual who has cared about the public interest.
Lorraine, would you call him an activist?
Yes, definitely.
Definitely that, huh? All right. Now listen, you guys, first of all, I should say, this is the Willens home. This is the breakfast table, right?
That's right.
And the kitchen is close by, and this is where things happen when a Willens crusade is underway.
People don't realize all the things that he did and all the issues that this city faced over the years. And so a lot of the young people and the young leadership now, they don't know what they don't know. In other words, there's all kinds of these things that happened. They don't know there was National Guard with bayonets and jeeps on the plaza. They don't know that Johnson County blocked off state lines so no one from Missouri could get across. And they don't know the fight and struggle for black folks in Kansas City, how hard it was.
He obviously got into some very high-profile cases in the 60s, dealt with police relations, and he was defending people, and he was making social changes already.
You know, just people who read the newspapers, watch TV, hear radio, are pretty, I'm sure, familiar with you over the years here in Kansas City. I guess you've been described as anywhere from a busybody to a knight in shining armor. When did you really start becoming deeply involved in different issues in the Kansas City area?
Well, in the Kansas City area, it would be in the late 60s when I represented a victim of a police brutality.
Sid was a champion for justice as relates to persons, particularly of color, who were abused, misused by police. And so we met that way, and shortly after a case called the Bailey case.
The one story that really struck me was the Bailey case, if you're familiar with that.
In one sentence, what was the Bailey case?
The Bailey case was a police brutality case where an officer beat a black man after he was handcuffed.
He fought for that case, probably never got paid. Could have hurt his business around town with the establishment, confronted what became a famous police chief in a police department that was, you might say, was fairly racist at that time in how they treated black folks.
But we found that filing the complaint with Internal Affairs didn't go anywhere. And making a presentation to the board didn't do any good. I mean, whatever the police department said was the case. And I think that Sid saw through this, a number of us saw through this.
Police said he was arrested at Harrison, and Bailey had told him he was arrested at Campbell. And so Sid wondered why they didn't agree. So Sid goes up to Campbell, and then he knows why, because at Harrison, there's just a small office building or shop, all dark, no one there. Up at Campbell, there's a 2- or 3-story apartment house with windows looking out on the scene. And so in Sid's mind, he's thinking, no witnesses at Harrison. Sid went then to the apartment house at night and started knocking on doors, and they're interviewing people. Did you see anything? And so he ran across 4 witnesses. So Sid went to the chief and said he wanted to have a hearing on this.
And the police department whitewashed the investigation, and I found 4 eyewitnesses, and the police department would not discharge the officer, and he was beaten after he was handcuffed, unmercifully.
Sid goes into the hearing room. He doesn't have Bailey with him, and it's the chief's office. Chief Kelly, you know, he became director of the FBI subsequent to that. Sid start interviewing him, and they said, no, he was arrested at Harrison, and Sid says, well, he says he was arrested at Campbell. He says, and on my yellow pad here, I have 4 witnesses say they saw you beating him up at Campbell. And Sid says, a tow truck had to pick them up, his car up. Let's call the tow truck company and find where they picked the car up. Was it at Campbell or was it at Harrison? And then one of the police officers breaks down, you know, and starts virtually crying. Oh, I knew I wasn't doing wrong, but I just lost my head. I didn't know what to do.
And I went to a public hearing, and we got rid of him, and that created quite a flurry, and that just sort of started me on various crusades. But
well, too often it takes place with a tragedy, whether it's a Michael Brown, or whether it's the 12-year-old in Cleveland, or whether it's the man in New York, whatever the case might be. Tragedies take place, and then people get stirred up, angry, and they put that anger to demonstrations, which we hope is peaceful demonstrations.
But defiance is not against the law, and particularly when we have now so many different races, creeds, colors, and everything.
For senseless violence in our homes and on our streets. Who were the effective complainers that gave us so much to be thankful for?
My childhood, I was born of a Esther and Louis Willens. My father sold corncob pipes. I was absolutely blessed by having a wonderful mother and a wonderful father.
Well, Sidney was a very good-looking boy. I put him in the category of handsome, and he would always take out these good-looking girls.
And was raised in Kansas City. Then I went to Paseo High School for 4 years, junior college, 39th and McGee, and then went into the Army, went overseas to the Philippine Islands, just as the war ended, became mailbag editor of the daily newspaper there.
I really suspect that there was a life-altering change for him when he went to the Army.
I used to be editor of the Army newspaper during World War II, and I was doing some of that same work to the point that General Douglas MacArthur decided that I ought to be digging ditches. So it starts way back.
Oh, boy.
Returned to Kansas City, and I became a lawyer. I got my bachelor's and my law degree at the same time, all on the GI Bill. My parents only paid $18.75 for my education, which was the tuition at junior college for this first semester before I went there. So I was the second youngest law student in the university.
Only years ago I was called a troublemaker. I'm not sure what I'm called now.
So maybe no stranger to controversy.
Yeah, right.
Would be a little bit more polite term for it.
What is so unusual about what I'm doing? Isn't this what the human race is all about? And I don't want to sound like any paragon of virtue. I got all the vices everybody else has got.
I'm a dumb lawyer. Now, I've just met you, and you think maybe I'm acting here, but I am not.
He would approach somebody, I'm a dumb lawyer, just right off the bat, because it was a fact-gathering mission. He needed to gather facts.
How do you process your ignorance? And we did what he did. He taught us how to get out your tablet and start writing down the facts and then finding out what the laws are, interviewing people, use the telephone.
He's a terrific researcher. When he goes into a project, he calls people or writes people, and he studies the issues, he studies the law, whatever is needed.
And he's audacious. He got in trouble, as you probably know, at the law school where he told, the professor was there, he told the students that the facts are more important than the law. and I don't think she invited him back, so.
In fact, one professor called the dean, Popper, the dean, and he called me at home laughing. She'll never invite you back because you said The law is a bunch of generalities. I don't want you to sit on the seat of your pants in a law library. I don't want that. I don't want you to be an Oliver Wendell Holmes. I want you to be a Sherlock Holmes. I want you to wear out the shoe leather on your feet to knock on doors to see who ran through the red light. That's how you win lawsuits.
Sid understands that it takes individuals to create a community, and it takes a community for everyone to thrive. And Sid is excellent in making sure that that community has life and vision and courage.
My intestines cannot endure sitting around a room in a legislative discussion with rhetoric and with people who talk and don't do. Yeah. And I find it totally incompatible to my own being. The frustrations well up when ego gets in the way and a problem solving, and when a conference is designed to supply somebody's egotism.
Yeah.
Can't stand committees.
He used to say to me, "Did you ever see any statues to a committee?" I said, "No, I don't, never have."
He does like to be recognized. And he realizes that, and he can't understand why I don't care that much about it. And but that's what gives him this power.
You have visibility, name identification. Everybody knows you.
This sense of respect everywhere he goes, and people know about him. They respect him and like him.
I could always count on him to provide good, sound information because of his research ability. He was just a very deep digger into whatever he was doing.
You know, his ideas of how to gather facts, how to write letters, how to use carbon copies, let other people know, so the person you're writing to knows that other people have seen this. It raises the stakes. Use the telephone.
Sid does his homework and shows you how big business sometimes overlooks what it's doing to the least of these. And I think it's folks like Sid who had put it right out there to you. Here it is, right here on the platter. Now, you can deny it if you want to, but here it is.
Sid is a man of his word, and if anything, I suppose I think about Sid in terms of justice. I said I have some heroes, and two of them were my rabbis, and two others are Alvin Brooks and Sid Willens. And basically for the same reason, and that is that they put their lives on the line for what they believe in. And if they believe in it, you know that it is just.
And you never quit.
Really? Well, I let everybody perceive that, and my work will be easier.
Did you ever give up on a crusade?
Well, let me put it this way. You give up when you see you're going down a dead end.
But here he is, working, not making much money for the city. He gets into law practice. He's building a law practice. As you know, it's labor intensive. You're not making a lot of money there in a small firm initially. And then he's doing all these public service things.
He's always fighting for the underdog and fighting big corporations, and I'm so proud to say that.
He can also write. He wrote many articles for the Star. That kept him at the top of his game.
And his civic responsibility had to be admired. You didn't have to love him or like him, but you had to respect him for what he's done.
I guess we want to think, well, what is Sidney's legacy? It's a lot of different places. There are court cases that have changed Missouri law. There are practices in the city that have changed.
We watched our father all of these years decide if it was for the greater good of the community, of the criminal justice system, or whatever, he would still take it on and fight for what he believed in. And you can't, not everybody really has that nature, and it was just his nature. He couldn't help himself.
Sid has been there for all of us. Prophets are never well appreciated in their own communities. They get in people's way. They make people uncomfortable.
He never was intimidated, and he's gone up against some very powerful interests and people in his history, and he never backed down.
And give me a one or two sentence lesson in how do you make public officials do what they ought to do anyway? What's the technique? What did you do?
Well, first you have to do a lot of thinking time and figure out, put their hat on your head and figure out what's achievable, what's sensible, without going off half-cocked. And then you ask yourself and you ask your wife to read it, and you turn it up and down, and you finally make a decision. This makes sense. It's not unreasonable. Everybody should do it. It's right, and you start then your crusade in the sense of writing a letter, a one-pager with sparkling verbs and nouns, and that's how you start and carbon copy everybody in town.
And he's kind of a one-page letter guy.
And in the last 30 years, can say, I have not written more than a single-page letter. And if you don't think that's hard, then you don't know what Mark Twain said. I don't have time to write a short letter.
We probably could have retired on what my father has spent on postage.
When Sid Willens writes a letter, it would not be unusual to have 70 copies. Down at the bottom it'll say copies to, and it'll list some people, and it'll say, and interested parties. 104 copies on your average letter goes out. So whoever gets a letter, I mean, there's no privacy. I mean, if they've been asked to do something, they know the whole world knows it.
There'd be a CC, interested citizens. And that little CC, the carbon copy, scared the recipients of the letters because they didn't know who was getting this.
To write a one-page letter takes tremendous, sometimes it's taken me 2 or 3 hours. But what it has done is provided the other side, in the case of a lawsuit, the insurance company, they read that one-pager and they saw the theme that I was going to use if I tried the case before a jury.
And I didn't quite understand it until I saw a documentary on Daryl Zanuck, who was a big Hollywood producer. And he did the same thing. And he was asked the question, why did you send this? I mean, I hear from the feedback is a lot of people don't even read them. He says, I don't care if they don't read them or not. But if they don't read it, and there's something in there that I wanted them to do, and they haven't done it, they're fired. I have a paper trail. And, Dad, I think that's the way he operated. And it got a lot of very recalcitrant, stubborn people and governmental bodies to do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise.
So if you don't learn how to write a one-page letter, make it precise, concise, you just will have to get out of your pajamas.
And he used telephone a lot. And I'm sure if he hasn't told you, he will about doing business in pajamas.
If Sidney L. Willens is the conscience of the community, as a lot of people say, then we're seeing some of the stuff that a conscience runs on. Lots and lots of little pink slips with the names of people and numbers, telephone numbers to be returned. The telephone may be the primary instrument used by the social activists today.
The shortest way to accomplish anything is a phone line.
There goes your phone. There's no use trying to do a show in Sid Willens' house because the phone's always going to ring. Go ahead. What do you got? One of these new phones that you can carry around?
Yeah, isn't this great?
I can see this now. You'll be walking all through the house, and you'll have the mayor, the police chief, or somebody on the wire.
Yeah, it's a great phone. You can walk around, drink coffee.
Out to the swimming pool.
Right.
Take it down to the supermarket.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people had, a telephone in the house and you had to run to wherever to answer it. He didn't believe in that. He believed that a phone needed to be within reach. So therefore there were phones in the kitchen, in the laundry room, in the garage. I'm trying to think where they were just everywhere. And of course in the bathroom.
And the reason why is that's how he would conduct business. It was on the phone. And he was
in the bathroom.
And he was, obviously, it made it easier to do 2 tasks at once, okay?
I just go to my favorite instrument, the telephone. That's how I practice law in my pajamas. I love the telephone.
A story for how sticking to a topic will get you where you want to go. Talk to Sid Willens and particularly hear the story of the visit with the Pope.
The Pope story is a story that has gone all over the world. I'm not bragging or exaggerating.
6 years ago, I decided that if a Jewish husband and a Catholic wife have been married over 25 years, they deserve an audience with the Pope. So I simply dialed from Kansas City, Missouri, calling for the Pope person to person.
And the operator says, yes, can I help you? And Sidney says, yes, I'd like to speak to the Pope.
And the operator says, who? And I said, yes, ma'am, I really do. It's a person-to-person call. It's not costing me anything. New York operator. There's a man here in the Kansas City who wants to speak to the Pope. New York operator. Who? Oh, wait just a minute. Rome operator gets on. There's a man in the United States who wants to speak to the Pope. Who? Says the lady.
And that created quite a stir among the operators in Kansas City and overseas and in Rome, as a matter of fact.
The operator was taken aback. He says, well, the Pope is sleeping right now. So he says, well, what time does the Pope get up? She says, well, I don't know what time the Pope gets up. He says, you'd have to talk to Brother McGuire.
So now I get up the next day, it's on a Thursday as I recall, in the middle of the night, to Brother McGuire answers the phone in Rome. And I'm sorry, we do not allow phone calls, personal calls to His Excellency. And said we, and I thought, boy, that may be the pipeline to the Pope.
So Sidney called Cardinal Cody and told him the story, and Cardinal Cody laughed.
He starts laughing hilariously. Listen, Sidney, you call that brother whatchamacallit back in Rome. Any Jew and Catholic married 30 years ought to see His Excellency. You tell him, Cardinal said okay.
Well, anyway, to make a long story short, Sidney calls Brother McGuire, and they correspond back and forth, and finally Brother McGuire says, all right, I have 2 tickets for you to see the Pope.
He just wilted. Brother McGuire and I became friends, and Brother McGuire remained there for 7 years, and I just dialed him. He and I talked by phone.
So we came to the auditorium, and we walked down steps, walked, and lo and behold, we walked on the first row. We were in the first row. And next to us was some general from the Philippines, big dignitaries. And the Pope came out, and he spoke in 7 different languages. And after he spoke, he came off of the stage, and he walked down the front row, and he spoke to everyone, shook hands with everyone.
That's the story of the Pope. And it went all over the country, 252 newspapers, and Chicago Tribune. When push comes to shove, the Pope's a pushover. Nobody knows me in Sun City, Arizona, page 3. Sid Willens meets the Pope. The funniest headlines.
He said, if you don't try something, you never know what'll happen. He said, I wanted to talk to the Pope. So we called the Pope, which I find absolutely fascinating. I was raised Catholic and never got to talk to the Pope. And here's Sidney, the little Jewish attorney, just calls the Pope.
I would say that my life has been blessed by having married the right woman, who was the right mother, who was the right grandmother.
I also was impressed with how he met Lorraine. You may know the story, but he was working in a shoe store, and she came in to buy shoes. And somehow or other he finagled that into a date. I don't know exactly how.
I tried to get her phone number. She wouldn't give it, but her friend did. So I ended up, that's how we met. And we went together, and I was teaching Sunday school and Scoutmaster Temple, and Lorraine's a Catholic, and anyway, and we're trying, finally the heat was, on, and just, and so we said we're going to get married. That's it. That's the story.
And as you know, he had trouble getting married. He wanted the marriage to be blessed by the church, and at those time, and probably by the synagogue or temple where he was, but in those days, neither a rabbi or a priest would do any kind of a joint wedding thing like that.
And I always remember the old saying, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so you come to a point sometimes when you can't do any good, and you just back off. It's counterproductive.
If I'm not mistaken, that saying came from a Roman Catholic saint, and you come from a Jewish background. Could it be that you picked it up from the lady to the left?
Well, let me tell you, I pick up a lot from this marvelous lady to the left. We've been married long enough for me to have learned. Yes, the answer is yes.
And yes, in this case, a marriage of this kind, Avis Irish Rose type marriage can work,
absolutely. Huh? Way back in 1950 when it wasn't supposed to work.
But she was just an elegant lady. Elegant. I always found it quite interesting when Sidney said, I don't know how this little Jewish attorney married this beautiful Catholic woman. He said, I don't know how that ever happened, but somehow it worked.
It amazes me how he did it all. He did it all. And
because of Lorraine.
Yes, because of Mom.
It's stories like that. His life with Lorraine had to be just amazing. And the way he talks about her. Every woman should have a husband that cares about her, like Sidney does about Lorraine, and still does.
Obviously, family is the top, and thankfully I married a lady that was able to put up with my 3 o'clock in the morning jumping out of bed and doing and writing a one-page letter.
He's still in love with the lady he married years and years ago, which is kind of a lovely story in itself.
Lorraine Willens, don't you kind of sigh when you hear a new crusade beginning and think, you know, by now, now your background is Catholic, but by now you probably learned to say, oi, here he goes again.
I do.
Huh?
I do. You're right, definitely. But he doesn't play golf, and he doesn't gamble, and he says this is his love, and so I go along with it, and I agree with most of them, if not all of them.
Probably not all of them, though.
Well, occasionally, maybe not completely, but mostly.
This notion of justice is never far from Sid's mind. It's not just an idea, it is who he is. So you see him react in that fashion virtually all the time.
We all have the same desire to protect the public. The question is, what and how do we do it?
Right is so important to him. And even if it would cost him, doing the right thing for the right reason is so important.
The police didn't care for him when he was trying to bring civilians into the complaint process.
And that led to him finding out about an office of an ombudsman that was just being set up in the state of Hawaii.
Ombudsman comes from the Swedish word umbu, meaning agent. He's an agent of the legislature. This is what we call the classical ombudsman. That was Sweden. The legislature appoints a person to receive complaints about government.
In the 1960s, there was a very strong movement in public administration to set up some kind of public official that could handle complaints and be fair and do investigations and lead to making changes in government. Sidney was fascinated with that idea because here he was dealing with police departments and administrative offices and so on, and he was really interested in change.
The editor of the Star, Dwight Pennington, says, look at New Yorker magazine, there's something about an ombudsman. I never even knew what it was. It was like a mouthful of mush. What are you talking about? See if you'd like to write something on it.
So he went out to Hawaii and met the first American ombudsman, a man named Herman Doy. And he came back and wrote a long article for the Kansas City Star, as he was wont to do. I often thought that Sidney never thought anything was real until it got into the newspapers.
I now get a call from Ralph Nader, and Walter Gellhorn, others who were starting to try to bring this ombudsman idea from Sweden, 1809, it was over to the United States.
And Sidney got the idea, aha, Jackson County should have one of these offices of citizen complaints. So he started lobbying Harold, and as he was doing that, also, you think about the late 60s, what was happening in the 70s was a time of civil rights, of revolutions, of the rise of the African American community. So for over a year, Sidney lobbied Harold Fritkin to get an office of citizen complaints.
And that was new. That was a very untried idea, and it took a lot of work on his part to educate the people who needed to make the decision to have that program.
The ombudsman sees patterns develop. If that person abused you, they abused 3 others. But you don't know it because we're all victims and knocked off one at a time. So now that ombudsman reports to the legislature and says, we better change this system.
They changed, and the ombudsman was a piece of changing the notion of civil rights and race relations in Kansas City. And there were a lot of building blocks to that.
It had strong investigative powers. It had the power of subpoena. It could lobby for changes. It had no power to make changes except to investigate and make public their findings and go to the media if necessary. That was kind of the ombudsman concept.
And he was sort of a thorn in the side for a number of agencies and organizations, but he stood his ground and won cases and won respect.
So every time the Citizen Commission met, which was monthly, there was a reporter from the Kansas City Star or Times there. And oftentimes somebody from the Independent Examiner would come. They always wanted to know, do you have a hot case going?
So I became known about this ombudsman, and that's sort of the reason why I take up causes, too, that it renewed my belief that, you know, we ought to try to figure out how to take a case and make a cause out of it to help improve humanity.
You know, I can recall incident after incident with Sid that always came out smelling like a rose. And people came to him because he had that reputation.
When a man named McNamara, who became chief of police here in Kansas City, came to Kansas City, and at one of those occasions he talked about the Republican National Convention that was coming here. And he was concerned about that, about the law and order of this thing and keeping control of the crowds and so on and so forth. And so I said, well, I've got the man for you, Sid Willens.
The convention in Chicago in 1968, there was riots or pandemonium. When the Republican National Convention site was declared to be Kansas City, I got a call from Police Chief Joseph McNamara, who succeeded Clarence Kelly, who became FBI director. And I was shocked, to say the least. He says, I'd like to meet you because I'd like you to help with an observer corps. We've got to do something so we don't have riots here.
McNamara reached out to Sid and said, you know, we need to do, and Walt Bodine, and said, we need to do something to make sure what happened in Miami Beach and Chicago with the conventions, because the Republicans are coming here, and there still was a lot of unrest.
So we ended up having 435 citizen observers around the clock, a week before the convention, the pre-convention activities, and during the week, the whole week. And we kept the peace, and it was quite a fascinating experience.
Well, you know, the story that goes around is when Sid Willens gets on your case, you might as well give up. And if you don't, it goes on forever.
Sidney's had a lot of lawsuits, unusual lawsuits.
Well, now you had a lot to do with starting the ombudsman thing. You had a lot to do with starting the Office of Civilian Complaints, the Watch Corps. I'm trying to think some of the other stuff.
Complaints about the tax department, as you can imagine. We got rules for visits to the jail changed. We got some changes for more chaplains to be allowed into the jail.
Attorney Sid Willens says the incident dramatizes the need for a witness protection program in Kansas City, Kansas, similar to the one he fought to establish in Kansas City, Missouri 3 years ago.
The criminal justice system is asleep in Kansas City.
You've worked for a number of different things in Kansas City, everything from abandoned houses and weed removal to crime victim compensation.
Willens went to hearings by the Finance and Audit Committee where he challenged the inspection department's budget request.
The Division of Family Services doesn't know what the police department's doing. The police department doesn't know what the Division of Family Services is doing.
There were complaints about personnel. Jackson County was famous for being a place of patronage.
The law says that you must have a certificate of occupancy. The building inspectors tried desperately to get a certificate of occupancy for these dwellings.
The juvenile system, getting juveniles out to the Justice Center for confessions, housing, Shame of the Neighborhood Award, maintenance reserve that we got the federal government to bring in $300,000, and then the $1,600,000 grant that we got 3 years ago for the police social work teams.
When there is no cooperation from the police department, then we must get cooperation from somebody else.
And so we got into other kinds of cases that the press loved. We had a case fairly early on about disco institutions in Kansas City not accepting blacks. At a certain time of night, they would say they'd let in the women, but they wouldn't let in African American males. And so we got called into that. We found ourselves going out at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night to dirty Sally's on the plaza, investigating how we were accepted or not accepted, or watching who got in and who not. We made recommendations about that and made some changes at the discos, particularly Dirty Sally's.
He's known as a Hellraiser, and that's something that I think is to give him praise for, because when he raised hell, it was on the right side of the ledger.
I know that when I'm with Sid, I'm sitting with greatness. I don't know if he would say that. I don't think he would. But I know that I'm sitting with a man who has built the foundations of the civic society in which we live, and that we owe a huge amount to him, and that he would never claim the debt that we owe. But I'm just so pleased that people like Sid exist, and in particular that Sid Willens has seen fit to give to the community what he has, because Kansas City is a much better place.
So he had that uncanny knack of looking at a problem, analyzing it, seeing how if changes were made, many more people could be helped. And I think his legacy will be in the number of people that we will never be able to measure that have been helped.
With all the forces of separation, of all the forces of segregation, with all the forces taking advantage of people that are in our society, that there's somebody like Sid who says, no, 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 and justice above all. So his work with poverty housing, the ombudsman, integration, securing for individuals the rights that they ought to deserve, but they're exploited. This is the kind of thing where we need a person in society, not just for the individual action, but for what they represent. A force for good that gives us a model of how we ought to behave, even when we don't have the strength or courage to do it. Sid performs a very important role in the society of Greater Kansas City, whether people know who he is or not. And I am ever so grateful that he is in my life and in the life of our community.
When people believe they can act as individuals and make a difference, it's good for them. And if they feel differently, it's bad for all of us, including our children and our children's children. Powerless people become apathetic, and they toss in the towel. And that means others have to carry them on their backs.
I'm on my boat, my fishing pole, just lonesome as can be.
Well, I would like to believe that if we lose hope and faith, whether it be in some supernatural or in our fellow human being, however, we will be self-destructive, and we can't give hope. There are too many examples of demonstrable accomplishments in this country, and anybody who does not believe we have a country that's great, and I'm not waving red, white, and blue flags here, I'm just saying, is crazy. There's a hell of a country we've got here, and we just have to continue to be involved as private citizens, and private citizens can do more than a city councilman or a legislator or anybody, including a news media, because you guys don't follow through. Those who follow through can accomplish something.
Each individual an activist.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good, Sidney. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
And best of luck with your project.
Thank you so much.
The news, weather, and sports, that's coming up next.